would you like to introduce our speaker who needs no introduction, but we're going to
He,
do
he
it?
really doesn't. And I'm not always the co-host, but I have co-hosted David. This is my eighth time. I can't imagine how many other times he's been on that I wasn't here. It's amazing. All right, so for the eighth time, I will read this great introduction that we have for David. David Teachout is a mental health therapist and consultant who teaches how relationships are at the heart of our humanity. David grew up as a Christian fundamentalist. I still have a hard time seeing that. Attending a Bible college where he earned a bachelor's in theology and psychology. During his studies there, he deconverted, has been on a journey of appreciating humanity and all the stories we create to build meaning and purpose in life. He has a master's in both forensic psychology and counseling psychology, and is currently focused on studying philosophy, ethics, and law, all the things I don't really get into. David has been actively working within the field of psychology as a therapist, social worker, consultant, and subject matter expert for 15 years, over 15 years. In his spare time, David enjoys reading a lot. Feel free to look him up on Goodreads, participating in fitness events, and getting out into nature as much as possible. His businesses can be found at lifeweavings.com, and his writing can be followed and subscribed to at humanitiesvalues.com. Welcome back, David.
Thank you, Rob. Yep,
Thank you,
yep. I
David.
think I'm like the STI that you want. It's yeah, yeah, yeah. It
So, like,
works.
don't throw any kind of like antibiotic cream on you or anything. You'll wither away and disappear.
Yes, yeah. That's pretty much how that
So,
works.
so, so David is
Oh man.
actually here. I have to thank him personally because I had invited a guest on and then I was ghosted unintentionally, it turns out, and we're going to try to reschedule that. But David stepped up at the last minute to do this talk. So thank you, David.
You're welcome. It actually ended up being rather serendipitous because it very much um provided the impetus to finish up a project that I've been working on for way too long. And it finally went live today. So
Great.
it was great. So um everybody who's here will eventually get a message in the chat that will be very, very, very helpful for you. So and but yeah, thank you for everybody for filling out the poll questions. Um, and we don't have to go through them right now, but I will note that yes, Arcane is something I've been obsessing about now for the last week
So
since
what is that?
season
I
two
missed the
ended.
pre-show talk about it. What is Arcane?
Yeah, so it's based off of video game. It's a Netflix show, animation. It is one of the most beautifully artistic shows I've ever seen, with a story that almost makes even the beauty of the art secondary. Um, Really, really well done, and bawled my eyes out more than once. Um, it yeah, in fact, I think there was a group of us there in another group or sport group we were talking. This came up, and it was actually mentioned that one person just couldn't finish it up right away because it's that powerful. It's a hell of a story. So
Wait, is it
um,
sad? Like, are you crying because it's that sad, or is it like touching?
it's
Like,
just really, really moving. I mean, there's so many themes that may or may not resonate, about the dictatorial powers of religion and, the savior, and, class warfare. So people might resonate, with those things. And then, of course, at the heart of it is the difficulty of family and two sisters that were raised in the underground, be in poor, beneath, quite literally beneath, in the sewers, beneath a extraordinarily wealthy and clean city. So yeah, read into that what you will. And they go separate ways as they try to figure out how to deal with their own individual experiences of trauma and don't want to spoil a bunch, but it's absolutely amazing. It is very much LGBT, supportive. The main, one of the two sisters, it has, there was a few people that complained about one of the last episodes in the second season, but it represents various cultures in a non-objectifying, just beautiful way.
Apparently,
Basically,
a lot of people agree with you, and the Wikipedia page says it set the record as Netflix's highest rated series at the time of its premiere.
both
Wow.
seasons got
Wow.
all 9 pluses in reviews.
All right, I'm gonna look that up.
So it's pretty incredible. So, but again, be prepared for it is one not safe for work, and in certain elements of it, and it is not good for all ages. Just to let you know. So there's some pretty brutal scenes and themes. So I you can talk about this all day long, and I could, but won't. Basically, if you go onto threads, it's like the thing. My entire timeline is chock full of people talking about it. So, and people cosplaying as the characters. I mean, it's nuts. It's a whole thing. So, yeah.
I love it. Well, I have been told by my best friend before this that I have to watch the show. So now I know I have to watch the show because it's been
It's
recommended by my best friend and David Teachout, who I get all my book recommendations from. So like the
there you go.
stars have
Yeah.
aligned. And I'm gonna have to see this. But
And it's
yeah, go ahead.
ties right into the presentation today. Honestly,
That's what I was about to ask you. It
it
sounds like it may have something to tell us about having big feels.
yes, big feels, but also how emotions work to basically they're enormous confirmation bias systems. They're basically our brains and brain body systems way of segmenting out what is and isn't appropriate for us to pay attention to in a given moment. And you see that played out in the characters, where how they view things is in many ways determined by the emotional element that they bring into a given moment, and what then that points them towards in what is important to them. Is this family as a value? This is where we get into values. Does family become preeminent? Is loyalty? Is safety? Is one's personal integrity? Is one's personal identity and whatever that may be. And how does that tie into when you think, well, no, this is good, but there's this other person in this group that also has a similar identity, and they're kind of assholes. So what do I do with that? How do I, navigate the embodiment of many of the things that are important to me in a group, while acknowledging that the ideals of it don't always get matched by everybody who's involved. And so it goes good story writing, I think, is good precisely because it mimics what we are doing all the time. We are actively creating the what we refer to as experience. you know and what I'm going to be going into here a bit is, one, acknowledging that experience itself isn't something we actively create so much as it's something that we find ourselves in all the time. And the degree to which we question it, the degree to which we uh pause enough so that we don't get caught up in it and forget and miss and lose sight of a lot of the things that were kind of automatically removed in our perpetual desire to, one, be right. And as such we will ignore or even confabulate or add, things in order to perpetuate the fact that, well, I knew I was right, I knew all along. And so, um, so yeah, that's where, so a good story is going to bring all that in and then reflect it back to you as a kind of like, wait, I know what they're doing isn't healthy. And at the same time, oh crap, I totally have seen me do that as well. And it, then, hopefully engenders any number of, one, personal reflections, but then, dialogue with, the other people in your life. So that's why I just get totally nerd jazzed out for really good writing. It's just so much fun, and hence why I'm an uber reader. So I didn't think I was gonna meet my goal of books read this year, and it now appears that I'm going to, because I totally procrastinated over Thanksgiving weekend and polished off a couple more and caught up. So it's utterly ridiculous that I will be likely matching 150 books this year. That is not anything that people need to follow suit on. It's ridiculous. I have no life. So just, acknowledge that I give up things in order to read that much. So, but, all of that, good stories bring in emotions. And so then the question immediately comes up of going, okay, what is an emotion? What is this, like, what is this thing that is at the core, the foundation of so much, media? It is there's a lot of talk, these days around what is or isn't misinformation. Um, that could be an entire RfRx here in the future. And like so many things, probably not going to have a standard opinion on that. But so much of what then we classify as misinformation is derived from the emotional, state that we are then evaluating the information in front of us, and what we then believe it to play a role in how we think the world should be. And so, you know, now we come back to, again, if they're audio, it will admit that audiobooks have been helpful in meeting that. So I'll say probably a good couple dozen have been audiobooks over the years. But I can't do other things very well with while listening to audiobooks. So I can't split my attention very well.
Do you not
So
drive or commute? Because I used to be able to, I had like an hour commute each direction, and I got through so many audiobooks when I was.
yes, yeah, but I don't drive very often anymore. So because I live in a small town, I work from home. So literally a store is 2 minutes away. So whenever I go up into the big city, it takes about an hour to get there. It's, listen, but then I'm listening to like podcasts and so on, not necessarily books. So it's really, back when I used to do security work, I used to be able to get through a lot more.
I
And
do
that would
find
be
that's a big
helpful.
competition these days, since yes, podcasts is there's a bazillion
Podcasts,
podcasts, and
yeah.
I
And this doesn't even get
subscribe to
into
so
like,
many.
right. And this doesn't even get into all the academic articles and everything else that, read, as, being so much, being the resource director for RFR, it's like, oh, right. Here's another, dozen things to read this week that people are sending and going, is this legit? So
I mean, they
yeah,
selected the right person for that role. I don't know anybody else that gets through 150 books a year. So someone was thinking.
I don't imagine I'll be able to keep that up. But yeah, 100 maybe is workable, but so so we get into then what are the nature of emotions, and I want to make a distinction here between emotions and feelings, which may sound a little odd, like, wait a minute, aren't they the same thing? And I said, actually, no. um, Especially cognitively. So feelings are basically the gut feelings. We often use this even in our own language. We'll make a distinction. So their feelings are the physiology that it's the meat suits, that we all find ourselves in. And it's everything from, the secondary brain in our gut. We have a massive neural cluster of neurons there. Hence that whole like gut feeling is in fact rather legit. It's everything from, the role that dehydration plays, hunger, sleep deprivation, or too much sleep, and for the rare person that gets that. And good question. I will definitely get into that later. Yes, thank you. I always hope that somebody brings up that movie, Inside Out. And so feelings then are the physiology. It's the thing, it's the um felt sense of, the pupil dilation. It's, increased heart rate. It's increased perspiration. It's increased sensation on the skin, where it's like, oh, I'm getting a chill. Why am I getting a chill? Well, part of it's cold, but part of it may in fact also then be, a sense of which, that whole thing of like somebody walked over my grave, notion. And there's a sense of trepidation and fear and so on. And but what feelings then are, or what emotions are, is feelings plus context that are then given a label. So the emotion of love, for instance, or hate, to do opposites. The emotion of anger and others, that we have are basically often the same or very similar physiological structures and experience combined with a particular context. You can feel a sense of excitement or certain physiological arousal of kind of going, wait, I really need to figure out what I'm going to do because something really big is about to happen. And it could be anything, including like being chased by a bear to having sex. Like you're going to have many of the same physiological expressions, and obviously the context is going to determine what emotion word you're going to apply to that. If you get those two things confused, um, you probably are going to have a bit of an issue. But in fact, that is a little bit of sometimes when we talk about the neuroatypical is exactly that. It's that interpretation and whether or not more emphasis is being placed on um, the physiology, or not enough emphasis is being placed on it. So there's an internalized weighting that is being placed on these things, and at times that will then incur certain evaluations that make it difficult for us to read a situation accurately.
Ooh, now, okay, I remember learning about this in school, which is the only way I am able to speak competent about feelings and or emotions. But I remember learning in a psychology class about someone who was testing this idea. And my psychology information is years old, so tell me if there's more since then. But I believe the way it went was they had a bunch of study participants and they injected them with epinephrine or something that would cause a heightened sense of arousal, like higher
Mhm.
heart rate and blood pressure. And then they put them in different scenarios. Like they had one group of people that were in a situation where there was some irritating person that was annoying them. And then they put other people in a scenario where there was something exciting happening, like they were going to win a prize. And then they had a
Mhm.
control group where none of that was happening. And they were all injected with the same amount of the substance that would cause this heightened sort of heart rate and everything. And then what they did was they asked people, okay, what are you feeling right now? What's going on? And the people that were in the annoying situation attributed their kind of heightened state of arousal to, oh, I'm really upset because there's this annoying person. I'm irritated right now. And then the people in the situation with the prize were like, oh, I'm really excited. This is so much fun. Oh, there's a prize. And then the other people were just like, I don't know, my heart's racing for no reason. And they basically had the exact same physiological state, but they attributed it to the different scenario that they were in. Is that
Yep,
basically what you're describing here?
that's there you are. And for what makes this even more potentially crazy making is that it's not our physiology responds to our projections of what we believe is likely about to happen. So, for instance, the so-called, the kid who gave my kid too much sugar and he was just crazy. No, really, there's a point at which sugar doesn't actually change behavior much at all. It's the anticipation of an expected outcome that then incurs one, a means of evaluating behavior that otherwise is the same, and then a response pattern from us to the other person, in this case, kid, that then increases their own reciprocity and their own physiology, which then induces new behavior. So, and this is why a kind of holding space for our emotional attachments and the verbiage that we're using and the initial evaluations that emotions are providing is so very important, because they're very easy to get one caught up in, and then two not see ourselves out of, because then it just kind of cycles through like, well, I am believing that this is what's happening. I have a ready-made story to explain to myself why I'm having this emotional experience. I then go looking for confirmatory information, which then incurs me to react accordingly, which then often will, facilitate the other person or group or whatever to, act in response. And then we go, see, I knew. And now most of the time, this is very, it's not deliberate. Obviously, most of this stuff is happening unconsciously. We're just simply experiencing this at a conscious level, going, "Oh my gosh, I'm totally in charge here." You are not, um, and you just happen to be there for the ride. And so most of the time, um, close for the comment from Rob. Um, Reverse. So a feeling is a physiological experience that gives you information about the world, and the emotion is your conscious awareness of what's going on. Because the emotion is what we have taken internally, so called, and combined it with what we believe the context is likely to induce.
So the
So,
emotion is feeling plus context.
plus context. Yep. 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 And so, which is where, and here's where people can, frankly, get bit, and where people can get manipulated, because, you can have, this goes into the whole like, I can't make you feel this, whatever that, is usually, said by a manipulator and so on. And the reality is that, okay, you can't make, and so like reach into somebody's head and do this. Um, at the same time, uh, if you tell somebody that you're going to say, for instance, like if I tell somebody I'm going to show up and support you in your event, uh, and so that person anticipates a level of support, which is itself inducing any number of value judgments around community and integrity and honesty and the nature of friendship. And then, but I say this knowing I'm not going to bother showing up. I know ahead of time, like, no. And so I don't. And then when you call, I wouldn't do this, by the way. This is totally a dick move. Try not to, that'd be awful. But I know people have done it. And so the uh so then say the person then calls, like, what's going on? And then nope, silence. Completely just ghosting you for a moment. Then what? No, exactly. So what is then happening? I have knowingly engaged in behavior that is going to induce a anticipated response pattern from you, because I'm aware of enough that, one, you took me at my word, and two, that you cared enough about the connection we have, that when it doesn't happen, it's kind of like, haha, and then to be able to sit back and go, well, I didn't make you feel that way when you come in being angry, is just is absurd. It's ridiculous. Of course, you didn't make in some kind of direct causal fashion, but you set the stage and engage in behavior in such a way that, more likely than not, based on how you feel, you imagine during conversation that this other person is going to look at the situation, is going to then react accordingly. So, and this is at the heart of essentially advertising. It's at the heart of politics. It's the nature of setting up a situation that, all things being equal, across a vast majority of a population, that you're likely going to anticipate X, and then they set up the follow-up in such a way as to induce a response that is likely then to happen. And so we see this in going back to stories. In fact, Carl, you mentioned earlier foreshadowing, where it had to deal with Daryl showing up next week and giving the RfRx. And so foreshadowing is a means of building on anticipation and then fulfilling it and getting what response? One, a felt sense of, I knew I was right. I knew that was coming. And two, that emotional response then of of rightness and honesty and so on. It's why some books and criticism will come out, right or wrong, but some criticism will come out, it's like, well, it didn't really deliver, is often the phrase that we may hear. Well, really, what the person what the person's saying, whether or not they're fully articulating this, is that they're saying, I expected and anticipated this based on the information I had available, and it didn't show up. Now, it doesn't mean that they're accurate. It just means that is the explanation of what is happening.
Ah, okay. So going back to your earlier example, if we're thinking of emotions as basically our sort of explanation or our label for feelings in context, other people can't make us feel feelings, but other people can manipulate the context in which our feelings take place. And so that's the sense in which they may be triggering or manipulating or
Mhm.
impacting our emotions.
Yep,
Got
absolutely.
it.
And people are doing that. Environments of which people are a part are doing that. Um, what we and all of this is to varying degrees of influence. So this isn't, it's the photographers and cinematographers as well are all very aware of how a lot of the set, a certain set of lighting, a certain pose. Anybody who's listening right now or watching, who, yes, vibes. It's, we just had a vibe election. I am so not going to get into all of that, but here it is. It's like, we had, for instance, since, okay, I brought it up, sorry, but it's like we had a response to an outcome that, in fact, we even had meetings to help with, and offering supportive space for some of our volunteers, precisely because in no small part, and I heard this quite often, is I expected one result and it didn't happen. Now, notice how important that piece is. When we come up with something, when we write a story, when we have an idea, and those ideas are then also then connected to a worldview. But when we have an idea, we have a essentially we are declaring this is how I think the world is. And when it doesn't operate that way, when the outcome isn't what we think it's going to be, why would like at one level, why should that matter? Well, it matters because our thoughts are not disembodied. Our thoughts are an extension of our body's interaction with reality. Again, I'm not a dualist. You know, in many ways, what's really kind of amusing is that every single time a religious, believer reacts to world events, they've effectively reinforced the idea that the notion of a immaterial reality is complete and utter hogwash. Because really, if it if thoughts themselves were disembodied, if thoughts just were out here floating and we connected with them, there's no real sense in which the denial of any of those should have any response whatsoever to our bodies or sense of well-being. It would make no sense. Why? What's the point? Instead, what we have is like what was just noted in the comments, our brain makes predictions to keep us alive. Precisely. But here's the thing. What we determine as being alive and i.e. supportive to our continued well-being, let's broaden that out a bit, is really, really, really big. We can expand what that means into infinity for all intents and purposes. It's why I'm actually old enough to remember pagers, and
I
in
remember
MapQuest,
pagers.
right?
They're not that
Yeah.
old. They're
Yeah,
recent technology.
they're yeah, and I think actually some people
They're
still use
just a
them.
primitive form of alert systems, David.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Getting your
Yeah.
alert.
But you get this pager, and then of course you had to go to a payphone, and oh my gosh, it was a whole thing. And yeah, formatted floppy disk, the 6.5-inch ones. Oh my god, oh man, yeah, it just Rob's all like, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Floppy disk, do you know what this is? Do you
floppy disk.
know
Oh
what this
my
is?
gosh, I was wondering what you were holding up. Okay, that's hilarious,
Oh,
Paper
man.
tape to program computers.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So we're going. That's old school.
so what
So
I'm hearing is Rob is a computer, technically speaking.
right. Yep. Well, and in fact, all of this goes into, speaking of people as computers, which is the modern, metaphor that we, use now for cognition. It's false. But
Well, but
it's
actually,
very
computers
useful.
was the name they gave to people who did computing, and the
Yes.
electronic computer took that name from people. Trivia.
Yes.
Oh, that's
Which is
very
why I
meta.
said Rob is a computer,
It's
because
a
you were
computer.
operating that
Yeah, I'm old enough to
device.
remember that, David.
Ooh. Take
You
that.
still have all your hair, so I still think you're winning on this.
Yeah,
It's
I'm a
so
genetic
good.
freak. What can I say?
There we go. So, it's like, this is where anticipation and the sense of the more I am accurate in my predictions of what is likely to happen next, whether or not it's the next minute, 5 minutes, 5 days, whatever it is, the more aligned I feel with the safety of being able to move forward. Now, note, we live in a world that is increasingly technologically driven. We're literally, having this meeting because of it. That is based on instantaneous gratification of one's anticipations. Notice I didn't say needs, but of anticipations. That, you know, the idea of waiting, I mean, oh, just to wait for anything. Disney is great for this at the way that they've changed what happens now at the amusement parks, and the fact that you can get pagers now where your kids will be off and the family will be playing around because, you know, God forbid that you actually wait patiently for literally anything. And so you're out there and then you get paged to then go, your place in line is ready. You can now, come in. So you're not waiting in line anymore. I mean, I mean that used to be like the big thing. You'd plan ahead, in fact, like, well, what time of day, here are the rides I'm gonna get, here's what time I have left, and all of this. And it would be a way of organizing our experiences that we have now offloaded to other means. And not I am the last person to be anti-tech. That is not the point here. What I'm calling attention to, though, is that as our world changes, our emotions as evaluations of what we believe should be happening next change with. And so if we find ourselves
Sorry, David. I muted you by mistake while I was trying to let someone
I
else
wondered,
into
I'm
the
like,
meeting. That
what
was
what
not
what did I
intentional.
say?
But were you worried for a second there after I muted you? Did you have a feeling about that?
There was a moment where I'm like, the AI overlords have happened. Lawnmower Man is real.
It was just me.
It was. So there's a sense then in which, as we look at how much of the what previously was built around our own self-organizing and our own self-reflection, where we had to determine strategies for navigating our time management. Instead, we're just increasingly offloading it, which has repercussions for our capacity to deal with, well, any adversity for that matter, because we don't have any practice at it. We've gone from, being able to wait in line for a show or whatever to now can any like here's an experiment to do later on is the next time you see you're out at a grocery store or at a movie theater or literally anything that has a line involved in it, look around you at all the people who are on their phones while they wait. They're not waiting for anything, they are doing to not have to wait. So catch what's going on there. Like, we are no longer waiting for much. We're ignoring that space and filling it with other things so that we never have to experience the felt sense of not having our anticipations met in a timely fashion, whatever the heck that means.
So should I not
That's
feel
certainly
bad when
changed.
my phone tells me I have spent like 22 hours of screen time this week? Is that what you're telling me? What is that thing?
Well, wait, 22 hours an entire week. That's not bad
Yeah,
at all.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's shoot. I think in certain generations, people are spending 12 hours a day. So on some form of screen. So no, 22 in a week. Shoot, you're practically cavemanish. So and again, all of this is not to be anti-tech or any of that. It's to, and I've gone a little bit, down a tangent a bit here, but all of it is to really reinforce that our emotions are taking place within a context of which increasingly it is involved with not dealing with any level of concern for things. In fact, we offload that. I don't need to be concerned about this. I've got to go. I've got a game to play on my phone.
I don't know who you're
Everything ends
talking
up being
about
avoidance.
offloading concerns and anxiety. I'm over here like trying to go to sleep at night, like replaying every embarrassing thing I said throughout the entire day, which is,
Yep.
by the way, numerous.
Numerous. Yes, yes. Well, and as noted in the comment, doom scrolling. Yeah, and doom scrolling is actually is a great example of how anticipatory reward. Notice that doesn't mean positive.
What does that phrase mean for some? Of course, I know what it
Yeah.
means, but some people might not.
So
Don't tell people what that word
it's
means.
it's the felt sense of being rewarded for being right that is based on, oh, I anticipated X and X did in fact happen. So when we, for instance, doom scrolling, I mean, we literally have a word for rewarding ourselves for thinking of the world as being awful. I mean, really, when when you think about it, like when we engage in this behavior, and this is where the articles around like dopamine and so on get so many things wrong in the popular writings about it, is because dopamine has nothing to do with positivity. Dopamine, amongst many other neurochemicals, has only to do with whether or not a perceived event is more or less likely to occur next or again and be repeated. It's about a reward system that says, oh, right, figured X would happen and it did. Therefore, I'm likely to do it again. So, doom scrolling is effectively a form of creating reality. We are reinforcing every single time, and dopamine's going, yay, I'm all busy, by actively supporting the negativity. What we do encourages repetition, which really goes into greatly how important it is to be very careful about what it is we're doing. Everything we do contributes to varying degrees, the likelihood of another thing continuing to happen again or not. This is one of the things I work with a lot of clients on when it comes down to um, the activities that you want to do. Ideally, want is a very broad thing here, but the things that you actively want to do in healthy ways, an ideal way, is needs to be set up in such a way that it's easier to do. If there's something that you've done and is unhealthy and you don't want to do it any longer, like, I don't know, smoking, then you make it harder to get to. You set up roadblocks so that by the time you've hit one or two of them, you're like, there's got to be an alternative to this. And what is that? The thing that you set up that's easier to reach for. This is basic, behavioral conditioning. And our emotions provide a window into what we have taken for granted as being what is important. They're an initial automatic assessment program that our brain bodies are, engaging in, that says, hey, wake up. There's something important that has either been supported, i.e., this is what we think should have happened and it did, or violated or thwarted, i.e., wait, I expected this to happen. It didn't. Now I've done an automatic evaluation about that, and we give it an emotional label. And then we immediately start, writing stories to make sense of it. And so I've referenced Lisa Feldman Barrett before. I cannot recommend her two books enough. And for that matter, go on to YouTube. She's got so many speeches and presentations on there. Like, you don't have to pay any money. Um, it's really, obviously I encourage you to read books, but sometimes they're a little difficult to access if you don't have some background in psych and frankly a little bit in neurology. But otherwise, her presentations are excellent.
Who
But
is this?
this is Lisa Feldman Barrett,
Lisa Feldman Barrett.
and this is from her book on how emotions are made. And she does how emotions are made, the secret life of the brain, and 7.5 lessons of the brain. That's her most recent one, which is very much it's very much like a sequel. You read the first one, the 7.5 lessons is kind of her way of making it even more accessible and more practically important to go, here's how this actually works in practice. But she notes that in every waking moment, you're faced with ambiguous, noisy information from your eyes, ears, nose, and other sensory organs. Your brain uses your past experience to construct a hypothesis, basically a simulation. It is not like Peterson's book.
Believe
And
Helen is
compares it.
trolling you.
Admittedly, there's actually some really good points in that book, but you can get a lot of those good points without the baggage. So elsewhere. Um,
I was about
and
to make an
so
off-color joke, but I'm not going to.
and compares it to the cacophony arriving from your senses. In this manner, simulation, i.e., the projection of what we think is likely to happen, lets your brain impose meaning on the noise, selecting what's relevant and ignoring the rest. Kind of an academic way of kind of distilling everything everyone's been talking about for the last half hour. Is, we are, there's all this information, and making this, in fact, more complicated or counterintuitive is that, and I don't believe actually that, the way it sounds in that quote is not what I believe is actually what is meant by it. And that is this: we've largely operated for a long time by this notion of the world is impacting us. There's just information that's coming in through our senses all the time, and our brains are rushing around to make sense of it. Here's the thing about that: when looking at the neural pathways that are going to and from our sensory organs, they actually have found that there are 4 times as many going from the brain out than coming in. So in many ways, what we're doing is creating a sense of what is likely to happen, and then touching base essentially with the information coming in to see whether or not we're right.
Now we're doing a lot of filtering though, right? Like the amount of
We don't do anything right.
sensory input that's out there that we're experiencing, like we're not actively processing all of that, right? So when you say the
We
amount of
can't.
information that's coming in, that's not the total amount of stimuli around us, right? That's the amount that
Well,
we're
and
aware of.
right. So for instance, say, just to use some easy numbers, say there was 100 bits of information coming in, and but the channels to do so are only 20. How do we figure out what's important? Well, we figure out what's important by our brains going, predetermining what's important based on past experience. And so it'll then touch on and check in on, but here's the problem: we only have those limited capacity for taking in the information, even though there's so much more out there. So it's only really touching base on little things that aren't enough to really determine whether or not we're fully accurate, but we're accurate enough.
So this is
You know,
where
we're
things like confirmation bias come into play, where we're
yep,
noticing the things that are convenient to notice and not noticing the things that would be inconsistent with our expectations.
100%. I
Got it.
mean, really, in many ways, if we all get used to the idea of equating confirmation bias, which is thinking, you're going to be in good you're going to be in a good space for understanding what's going on. It's not whether or not we are biased, it's the degree to which we are aware of it and making steps, implementing strategies to mitigate its influence. That's it. We don't get rid of it. We can't get rid of it. It's literally like, you know, every single bias out there, every single logical fallacy out there is useful depending on a situation. You know, the logical fallacy of authority, for instance, probably one of my favorites. Like, don't trust a person just because. Well, but we
So
kind of do need to, you know, in many instances of our life, because we don't have enough time, inclination, ability to analyze. So what we do is we create shortcuts to go, well, this authority I'm okay with. Like, you know, because why? In the past, they've met this criteria, which effectively is what we've been doing all along.
it's a heuristic for surviving. And yeah,
Yes,
and if people are interested in a deep dive into that subject, I did a talk 3 years ago. I can't believe it's 3 years.
yes, you did.
And I just put the link in the chat. And for people Googling this, it was critical thinking, inoculating yourself against false beliefs, RfRx.
Ooh, that was
Yep.
a fun
And,
one. I
and it did
remember
talk in
that.
the beginning about the limited amount of information that we can actually absorb from our environment, and then your brain makes estimates and assumptions about that. And then I did get into also logical fallacies and biases, which you
Mhm.
also make bad decisions based upon, sometimes good decisions, but also bad ones. So yeah, it's really helpful to understand all of that stuff that David is talking about in detail.
So
Yep.
basically, if at any time you're thinking to yourself, I'm the objective one, I'm being objective, you are fooling yourself. You
Unless
need
it's
to
me,
stop.
because I know I'm right.
Yeah, unless it's yeah, unless it's
Oh,
Rob. Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we are
Yeah.
only
Rob's a
logical. We
Vulcan,
don't have.
everybody. Rob is always objective because he's a Vulcan.
Even
Yep.
Vulcans are sometimes wrong. One of the worst things they ever had Spock say, and he said it in the original series, and then he said it in the rebooted movie. He did the Sherlock Holmes or Holmesian fallacy about if you can't think of any other solution than the thing that you think it was has to be it, and it was just wrong. It was a logical fallacy with a
Yep. It
name.
is.
Yeah,
It's
Yep.
also not deductive reasoning.
that's right.
Oh,
It
oh,
is
don't
not.
even get me
Yeah.
started on that. Ah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's like if you have eliminated all the other possibilities, then the most unlikely thing you can think it is it must be the answer.
If
No,
you eliminate
Like,
the
you've
no.
eliminated all the
impossible,
possibilities.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. Because
It's
it is, in
mm,
fact, that one that assumes that you have the capacity to think of all possibilities.
Exactly.
Which is
not.
absurd. Of course not.
And
Science
and
itself
and
is
and Sherlock
yeah.
Holmes would, Conan Doyle made him, think that way. And maybe all right, maybe Sherlock Holmes was that brilliant, but most people are not.
Well, also,
Well, it
like,
helps
let's
when you're
just
fictional.
recall that Arthur Conan Doyle believed in a lot of pseudoscientific beliefs and
Yes,
garden fairies and
the
things.
6-year-old
So,
girls took him in, and he believed in garden fairies and went all over the world preaching about them. Yes, that is true.
I love it.
so yeah.
Well, this is where
So
what was it?
consider your sources.
Yep. So many of the famous scientists throughout history have believed in some really crazy stuff.
Yeah, there we go.
So alchemy was a big one.
it has been typed into the chat. I got it a little bit wrong.
Yep.
Eliminate if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Yeah, no.
No, no. And
And
yet that often runs conspiracy theorists all
Yes,
over the place.
absolutely.
So
A
Absolutely.
Yeah.
lack of creative thinking. You have not thought of all of the options. I don't care what the problem is. I guarantee you have not thought of all possibilities.
You have not.
Right.
No. And in
Yeah.
fact, what you believe to be impossible
Right.
may not be
It's
the case.
it's a form of the argument from incredulity, which is I don't
Mhm.
understand how that could happen. Therefore, God or whatever else you
Right.
substitute, because you
Yeah.
don't
I
understand.
can't comprehend it, so therefore it must be
Yeah.
impossible. That says everything about you and nothing about the statement, but okay.
I prefer the
Yeah.
more absurdist view, which is that I try to do 6 impossible things before breakfast.
Thank you, Lewis Carroll. Yes.
I knew you'd get it.
So, yep.
No, Helen. Helen just wrote something I cannot believe. Helen, you have to chime in here. Is that true? Or are you making that?
Worked at the Psychic Center. Oh my gosh.
Is that
Yeah,
true,
when I
Helen?
worked at the Spirit University, and I had to explain to a couple people that they were actually fake,
They
but
thought the fairies
people
were real.
actually believed.
Oh,
Yes, they thought the fairs were real. Listen, I like Rob. We could do a whole other interview on the crazy shit
you
that
need to do
happened
that.
when I was working there, but people really
Oh,
believe, and this is the thing, but it's motivated reasoning that they wanted to believe it enough that any other information that was introduced would they would deny, because I had conversations with people where I was like, this isn't actually true, and they would want to debunk me in the middle of the conversation because they have motivated reasoning, because if
oh.
fairies aren't real, then all the magic in the world goes away.
I was going to ask. I can understand people
Obviously.
having that point of view about not wanting to not believe their religion because then they don't get an afterlife or whatever. But why would they care if fairies are real? But you're saying it leads to something else.
because because it's the same, but it's the if you think about it, it's the same thought process.
Well,
It's the same sort of thought process. It's like, this is a belief I have. I want it to be real. I'm going to deny any sort of evidence that pushes against that.
Well, I'm sorry,
well, and
David.
that's
I hijacked
the
your
other
thought. Go
thing.
ahead. Go on.
No, it's okay. Well, and this all feeds right back into, so really it's kind of like when we equate confirmation bias with reasoning itself. Motivator reasoning is really just thinking. Like nobody isn't operating from motivated reasoning. Like it's literally just what we are doing all the time. Because reasons are justifications to ourselves first, and secondarily then to as a signal to the group that we have belonged to that you're right, we're copacetic, we're good, like we belong to the same group, don't worry about me, we're all set. And which is why political rallies and or churches or literally any group is a fascinating study in um, the innate quality of motivated reasoning, because we are constantly setting things up for a purpose. Broadly speaking, what I mentioned earlier, which is we want to make sense of the world. We need it to, because we need to determine how best to use our limited resources to then deal with what we believe is likely to come next in whatever time frame. And so we are deeply motivated by things that we're not even fully aware of initially, and then make up reasons for later to varying degrees of you know group cohesion and solidarity. And so, there's something around. So, the new book I'm going through, The Experience Machine, by Andy Clark. Uh, Highly recommend, with the caveat of if you want your world to turn upside down a little bit. Um, and he notes how, so basically, what our bodies are doing is that instead of constantly expending large amounts of energy in processing incoming sensory signals, as Rob was, noting earlier, the bulk of what the brain does is learn and maintain a kind of model of the body and world, a model that can be used moment by moment to predict what is likely to come down the path of that sensory signal. So quite often what's happening then is that, in fact, so my go-to example on this is when you're wandering around your house and you stub your toe on something and you scream at it, who put that there? And especially if it got moved without your awareness, it's a very quick, way example of noting that we are not just simply taking in information and then evaluating it. We are anticipating what is likely to be happening, acting accordingly until such time as a threshold has reached to say, oh, nope, we were wrong. And this is where, like Helen was noting, motivated reasoning and so on does have a bit of truth there, is that it's not that only some people are doing it, we're all doing it. It's where it becomes a problem is the degree to which you are actively doing so in the face of so much else in the consequences of doing so. But that's just it. Who gets to determine what the consequences are and what they're meaningful for? To change someone's opinion about something is not about offering up enough evidence, so called. It's about helping them see that the consequences of continuing down this path of anticipation or belief is worse and unhelpful in the face of doing a different path.
So
Is where
then
we get in,
what? Oh, sorry. I think you were about to answer the question I was going to ask. So go right
which is
ahead.
where we get into, the classic example of the person who, convinced, KKK members. What he really was doing there was building a relationship that the person cared about enough so that the person with a set of beliefs had to then make up this choice essentially internally to then go, if I keep this belief, I'm going to have to give this up. But I like this. This guy's cool. I really like the bond that has been facilitated here and built. So what am I going to do? I'm going to give it up because the consequences of keeping it are outweigh giving it up. So, and here's where it's like, yeah, evangelical Uno reverse card. Yes. I mean, that's essentially what, don't forsake the assembly means. Like, why would that be such an important thing? Because every time you belong and participate in a group, you've essentially said, the way I see the world is one, being supported by this behavior, but two, I have decided that it is better to belong than it is to challenge what might get me removed. And so we go along. It's why we have group solidarity. Doesn't make it necessarily a bad thing. Human civilization has accomplished great things, by doing this, but it does point to some of the difficulties of, and we'll get to the Q&A here in a second because there's been some really good questions I've seen about how we then apply these things to our own individual life and the decisions we're making. Because if these are the systems that are happening, then we are at the mercy of and possibly going down paths that may not be helpful. Maybe. I'm not here to make that decision for you, but it is kind of like, essentially asking the question of what do I think is so that really isn't? It's that epistemic humility. It's that, thinking six impossible things before breakfast is essentially a kind of, humorous way of declaring, do you really know what you think you know? Probably not. And that's okay. It's all right. That level of uncertainty does not mean the end of the world. It may feel like it, just like waiting in line for, in fact, it's been, see if I can remember the number correctly. Basically, it's largely been determined that by video game designers and particularly mobile games, that if the person isn't doesn't get a response in 0.45 milliseconds, they've moved on. Like, and that number has shortened over time. We used to be capable of waiting a little bit longer, but it's gotten increasingly, as technology's improved and signal strength has gotten better, then our capacity for waiting has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter, because we are anticipating the fact that why should we have to, which has so many ramifications when it comes to social policy and decision making and the technological divide between classes and people groups, of what that then, how it informs decisions people make. I mean, there's ripple effects go all over the place when we recognize this. Just to how fast your modem speed is. And what do we cut out when it isn't fast enough?
So what does that mean for the way we experience and process and respond to our emotions? If it's what I'm hearing you say is that people maybe have today a reduced tolerance for waiting for a response, or maybe we're reacting more quickly to things. What does
As
that
an
mean?
example. Yeah.
What does that mean for how we experience our emotions and how we manage them?
So say you're in a conversation with anybody to some varying degree of relational intensity, casual to intimate partnership. How fast do we expect a response from them? And if we don't get it in a way that we anticipate, and that anticipation is faster than what the other person is able to do, particularly given a certain context, what do we then do? We fill in the gap. And then what? Then we think, and now we go right back into, because I've now, thought this, I then act on it. The person responds. They don't even know what happened internally. They don't know the story that we made, but now they're reacting to the behavior. We're acting on it. And then what? Reinforces, yep, I knew that all along about you. I knew you didn't fill in the blank. I knew you didn't love me. Is a, far example. I mean, this is one of the things, the utilization of the term neuroatypical, I think, is way too broad. At the same time, there is a truth there of how each of us at the individual level incorporate information and respond accordingly is different. And when we expect things to happen automatically, we're not letting that individual difference breathe. We're not letting the other person be who they are. We're expecting them to match what we want, what we think is correct. And then when we respond and they get frustrated, what do? Well, I knew it. You just don't really want to have this conversation. No.
Can relate. Let me tell you, I don't know if this is typical or atypical or if that label matters, but identifying an emotion and then analyzing and then having a response to it in the context of the conversation we're having is not something I'm going to be able to do for you in real time. Like if we're expecting an answer and having a back and forth, I'm going to have to get back to you next week after I have consulted my list of emotion words and let you know how that thing you said made me feel. This is not going to happen in real time. Well, you know, that's interesting that I used the term real time, because what does that even mean? What is real time?
Yeah. Or even the comment, expectation versus reality. There is no difference.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the more like disturbingly counterintuitive things when we really start understanding that we are not passive recipients to reality as if we are somehow separate from it. We are active creators, of which the determination of our humility and how we are going to get along with ourselves, let alone everybody else, is largely about the degree to which we slow the F down and go, maybe I should, take stock of what I think is so and just isn't. And how many conversations, how many ideas, what for that matter, how many of the potential ripple effects of the other person that we have encountered who could have been something different, who could have embarked on a different path? We didn't give them the time of day.
So what should we do about this? I mean, we can't necessarily take ourselves out
Mhm.
of the reality that we live in which we use the internet and we have some things that work on this instant gratification timetable. But it sounds like perhaps that is out of sync with some of the other ways that our brains and bodies work. What do we do then to productively manage our emotions in that context?
Practice. So, um, so I can say, one of the things I mentioned at the very beginning is that the project I've been working on for way too long is a online class that is about particularly anger, but really it is the principles and skills that are taught in it really touch on all of emotional experience, because it goes into how do we slow down enough? What are the processes by which we can, and new habits we can form to take stock of what our judgments have made and provide ourselves more room to flexibly respond to both difficulty, and if you want to take it out of anger, to literally anything else. And that class actually went live today. Um, and for anybody interested, I'll actually give a coupon where you can actually, here we are.
Ooh, I love coupons. I don't buy anything that's not on clearance, and I believe it's Cyber Monday today.
It is.
Or they will
So,
inflate things and then make you think like you're getting a discount.
yep.
Ellen, don't tell me that's what happens today. I bought a lot of things today that were on
Let's
sale. I need to believe that I got a good deal.
Okay,
So
and
this is
then
not
you are
inflated.
allowed to live in that delusion, and I support it.
Yes. Yep. So the coupon code that is in the chat right now, I'm not going to say out loud because it's only going to be valid for about a week or so. So feel free to share it to anybody who you think might be helpful. But um, it will get you 75% off the price. So which makes it, I mean, a couple of Starbucks coffees, really. So,
But how many
but
Dunkin' Donuts coffees is that?
probably considerably more. Yes.
Okay.
And And so, but the point of the point of the class and point of this is, in fact, I will go ahead and share. Here we are. So real briefly, here's one of the images that I've created over the years that goes into how we slow down enough to take stock of basically our own bullshit. And I say that with the utmost of affection because that's really what we're doing. And that is understanding that anytime we're triggered, i.e., having an emotional experience, it is because something important has been supported or violated. And what that something is a value, i.e., the story of then what we think this should look like in practice. We don't get triggered about things that we don't care about. We don't get angry about things we don't care about. In fact, if you want an easy solution to never be angry or upset ever again, turn to apathy. And I'm not advocating for that. That would be utterly awful. But it is a solution. And in fact, it's in some ways what people have turned to as we increasingly turn off more and more connections to say, I don't want to deal with you, I don't want to deal with you, I don't want to deal with you, in order to effectively almost not quite weaponize, but certainly you know instantiate apathy as an activity rather than an emotional state. We're using it as a means of not being worried anymore. And so once we've and slowed down enough to go, okay, wait a minute, I've had this emotional reaction. It means something is important to me. Okay, well, what does that thing mean? And that's where we get into the structures of how we have written our stories. What does that mean to me? How do I think it should be? That's where we get into this. And our behavior is last, which always is fun whenever I talk with people about anger, is because so many people have gone through like, some kind of managing, anger class or whatever. And I could care less. I have no problem with your emotional response. It's spot on every single time. You didn't choose it. It's just there because it's just a kind of signal to tell you, hey, wait a minute, something important is happening. What we then do with it, how much we get stuck in thinking that the story that came along for the ride is all we need to know, that's where we get into trouble. And our behavior then reinforces that. Because again, we come back to what is behavior? What are our actions? It's about reinforcing the fact that we're right, that the world is what we think it is. The doom scrolling. I'm harping on that, but I do it myself at times to try to, stem myself out of it. But it's such an easy example. But our behavior is essentially that scrolling is reinforcing, I knew it, the world is a cesspool, screw these people, filled with assholes. It's just that reinforcement. And even if we feel icky about it, hence the dooming part of it, there's a little piece there that says, oh, but at least the world is what I think it is. And there's a moment of rightness that we then think, well, at least with this, now I know what to expect going forward, so I can organize my behavior accordingly. Of course, the problem being is that we've organized our behavior around a lie, or at least half truth. Try not to be too harsh there. But we've organized our behavior around a limitation. And there's the problem. So what are we going to do about it? We slow down. We work through these processes of going, okay, so being aware of your surroundings and noting the fact that, we have, limits that are being placed on us as we recognize I'm being influenced by all sorts of things. It was 15 degrees this morning for the weather this morning here where I'm at in South Dakota. I didn't go for my morning walk. But note though that the choice to do so has a cascade effect as to, well, I'm used to doing this thing. It's part of my morning routine. So it can then generate a sense of, being off. It can, unless we replace it with something else that's similar enough to, make sense. So being aware of our surroundings and the things that are impinging on us, everything from changing of seasons to, uh, you know, Thanksgiving, the holidays, and all of the social, pressures that are around that. Whether or not we've engaged in it or not, we're still taking that in from broader society to, whether or not we overate and felt sluggish, which then makes it more difficult to respond in certain ways. So being aware of our surroundings, acknowledge the role that those environments have on you, actively engage in experiences that are difficult. Now we get back to that waiting piece. Choose. Choose as much as possible the adversity that you're going to experience. Not because we're masochists, although teach their own. It's because we are training ourselves to be able to say, this is okay. I can feel uncertain and it's not the end of the world. It's okay. And when we do it deliberately, it's helpful even more in being reinforced. And lastly, holding our thoughts lightly. Basically, if we can just operate from the idea that we are wrong to some degree every waking moment of our days and when we're asleep, it's a good space to be in. It's actually a healthy space to be in. To acknowledge that I don't have all the information to make a definitive, doesn't mean that we don't make decisions. It's just that how much weight do we give them and how much are we willing to then go, I made the decision and it worked out okay, but what did I miss? Probably did. In fact, if I'm going to be certain about anything, I'm certain that I missed something because we just had to have. So that's how we address, in a manner of speaking, as one means of dealing with the fact that our brains don't care about truth. They care about making sense. And if that means curtailing what we have access to, it's going to do it. And if we are interested in being more flexible, in frankly figuring out what it means to be us and all the possibilities that exist there, here's one way of doing it. We actively engage in a way that, yeah, it's going to be a little uncomfortable, but ultimately, we're going to be better for it.
Okay. So I love that you have given us a list of some action items because I am a list person, and I need instructions. So thank you for giving us those. I know we have a lot of questions about this, but is there anything you want to say to kind of wrap up or summarize all of this before we go to that? Because I feel like we covered a lot there. And what should we walk away from this with? How do we manage ourselves going forward?
At the end of the day, don't lose sight of the fact that we have bodies. It's actually, related to, I'm on a real theme and probably going into the next year, is related to the talk I gave at the excursion, the fall excursion a couple months ago. We are embodied creatures. This is how we are living. This is how we believe ourselves to make sense of things. We don't experience the world as in the same way as a giraffe does, or an ant. And that means something. How we live in a sense in a kind of middle world of experience. We don't have access to quantum, and we don't have access to the massive things, not without, a lot of math. And even then, we don't really have access to it. We create tech to facilitate those connections.
Mhm.
But we don't have we live in this middle ground, a kind of basically in the realm of Galileo, and the realm of you know Copernicus and so on. We live in the world that says, here's what I can see, here's what I can figure out, but man, is it not the whole picture?
Mhm.
And that's okay. But it does mean that depending on how we want to live our lives, it's taking that in and recognizing, okay, well, my body lies to me, not nefariously, but it just doesn't give the whole picture.
Mhm. So I like how you summarized that. You put it in the chat, but I'm going to read it out loud because I think it's a great summary. You said, be aware of your surroundings, acknowledge the role that various environments have on you, actively engage in experiences that are difficult, and hold your thoughts lightly. I love that. That's a great list. And it's a set of instructions. I love both of those
It
things
is.
because I've been told I might be AI in the chat this evening, and I am neither confirming nor denying that, but I hope to bestow my phonetic blessings upon you as long as possible. But that I think is a great, yes. AI thrives on instructions. I can neither confirm nor deny that, but that
Also,
seems like
David, just a side note, the talk that you gave at Excursion has been requested to become an RfRx talk because I said so. So you're going to have to do it as an RfRx talk.
That works. I've
so.
been
Okay, cool.
revamping it and making it better. So yeah.
I need
We will
witnesses to make sure that I brought it into the ether.
we will
Yes.
definitely look forward to that. Okay, and we have got to go to questions because it's time for
Yes.
questions.
It
So
is time for questions.
let's do that. AI thrive on instructions and following a schedule. I'm
I
not
love it.
saying that we're AI here. I'm just saying that we like instructions and we're going to follow a schedule. So, having said all that, I have dropped the link in the chat to your accepting your anger class that people have a coupon code for because it is Cyber Monday. Well,
I
if
didn't
you're
even think
here
about
in
that.
person, it's Cyber Monday. If you're watching this later, you're just going to have to get it at full price. But
Yep.
nevertheless, let's go to questions. So we have our first question of the evening, which you noted earlier and said you wanted to come back to. So let's come back to that now. Someone was asking, what are your opinions on the movies Inside Out and Inside
Oh,
Out
that's
2
right.
with the way they show how emotions work?
So I have not seen the second
without too
one.
many spoilers, please. I have not seen
Yes.
yet.
So I haven't seen the second one, but I really, 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 really want to. Helen is expressing the desire that I want to see it. So I think they're the first one. It's brilliant. It's not at all how emotions work, but it's a brilliant representation of how we can have a conversation about our emotions, and it can be a way of separating out. In fact, it's a practice that I have had many clients do. I had one person who, so often, particularly for people who are really, really dealing with a great deal of anxiety, is to spend time drawing it out and coloring it and giving it a shape. It's a way of externalizing it so we can go, oh, there's this thing that is not synonymous with me that I am then interacting with. It's not something that is happening to me, it's happening alongside of. And so by drawing it out, one person, in fact, was at a thrift store or whatnot and found some stuffed toy that was this like weird spiky alien creature or whatever. And the person purchased it immediately. She's like, that's my anxiety. And so it was hugely helpful for them, because every time it showed up, they're like, yeah, no, I see you. It was a way of changing the relationship that they had with their own internal experience, which is actually one of the lessons I get into. But it can be hugely helpful. And so the movie is just one of those ways of being able to do it. Like, draw it out. It's fantastic. Just, it's just not science. It's a representation and a useful tool to talk about things. And it's a great story for that matter.
The one negative thing I heard about it from, talking to people who understand the fallibilities of human memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't seen it, is what I heard people saying about it in this context, is that it presented memories as if they're stored like digitally in a computer and you just pull them back out and they're
Yeah.
exactly the same.
Yeah, that's so completely not
Yeah.
accurate. It buries the meter in ridiculous. Um, so yeah, don't take science from it. Which is probably a good rule for most movies,
No,
really.
but
But as far as a great story and a way of especially for kids, although frankly adults, I mean, really, it's just a good story. And so being able to talk about it in a way of saying like, you know, my emotions to in order to assess them better, to separate them from me, um, is can be really helpful.
Yeah. That reminds me of what my college rifle coach used to tell us whenever we would have a bad shot. Invariably, she would say, "That wasn't you. You don't have to worry
Yes.
about that because that wasn't you." Because you make a bad shot when you're like getting anxious and you're in your head and you're not thinking,
Hmm.
and now you're shaking, your hands are shaking, and she would say, "No, don't worry about that. You don't have to worry about that because that wasn't you. You can just put it
Yep.
aside." And
Yep.
that was actually a really good way of disrupting that anxious feeling and stopping it from continuing to reverberate through your body. So I love that. Very cool.
It's
Okay.
fun.
All right. We have many more questions, and spoiler alert, we're not going to get to all of them. So stay for the hangout, so we can get to the rest of them. But Rob, what else do we have?
yes, I'm actually interested in this other one that was put up early because I have also read different things about this. The question is, I have heard recently that trigger warnings are not actually reducing harm, and the argument is now, I am not responsible for you being uncomfortable. Should we still be offering trigger warnings, and regardless or not, how do we reduce harm in online spaces?
That is true. Trigger warnings are exactly counterproductive. If anything, it actually induces, which would make sense because they're essentially telling the person to anticipate an awful thing. And so, why would that reduce any kind of of emotional difficulty? Like it makes no sense, just on the face of it, when you apply this understanding of cognition. um and so if I had my way, we wouldn't use them at all. um and instead it would be uh just taking stock of, so this kind of comes back to being aware of our environments. So when it's to recognize that, um, yeah, content warnings can be helpful to a degree. Again, they're kind of a similar thing though, because you're essentially, unless you're really, really detailed, which would then defeat the purpose, the person's going to fill in the gaps of what they think that content is going to be in practice, and it's almost always worse than it probably was. So I mean, you're inducing a response in the person every time you mention a particular topic. So in many ways, oddly enough, annoyingly, if we want to reduce the difficulties of online conversation, it starts with us. It starts with being clear about um, what you are looking for online. So the kind of doom scrolling or other things that are similar, the trolling for trolls is a common practice for some. Um, Talk about unhelpful. Um, I mean, you're basically just reinforcing the idea that the world is filled with assholes, which um, is true, I guess. There's 7 billion of us, so you're gonna find any number of awful, people. But is it helpful though? I don't know. Probably not. So it's so anytime you encounter an online space, is to be really clear about why you're there and have boundaries in place for yourself as to what you are and are not willing to put up with, and you just leave. I mean, we were having a conversation earlier about uh, the blue sky and new social media platforms. Um, as one of my favorite writers, Stone Kettle is his screen name, says, block and block liberally. The entirety of social media space is pretty much designed around the idea of curtailing what you do and do not want to encounter.
So I pretty much
Use it.
don't want to encounter social media, so you will
Right. So
rarely
don't
find
get
me
involved.
on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I
Well,
mean,
and
it's
yeah,
yeah.
I feel like that is perhaps the intended purpose of content warnings. I think maybe they've taken on sort of two different meanings. We have, on the one hand, the use of the trigger warning or the content warning as a way of sort of saying, hey, I'm about to say something controversial, bet you can't look away. Um,
Yeah.
and in the more trolly sense, but then maybe in the more traditional sense of the term, isn't the idea behind a content warning, if it is sort of applied in its true sense or its intended sense, to indicate to people, hey, we're about to talk about XYZ topic.
Mhm.
If that is something that you are sensitive to, we're letting you know before it comes up, this is your chance to step away, or maybe don't continue reading this or engaging with this if you know
Yeah.
that this is going to be something that is going to be overwhelming for you.
And that is like the comments just made, don't blindside people.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where it can be helpful. And that's where it's being really clear on what the outcome is that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where being really clear about what space you're in. It's like having a conversation with somebody, and there was advice that I heard recently in a conversation that a person had heard from somebody else around when in an argument, only argue about the one thing. Don't bring up, don't use it as an excuse to bring up, well, I've had an issue with in many ways. That is, kind of like a content warning. It's basically like, we're here to discuss X, and things have shifted, and now we're going to basically talk about something or introduce something that wasn't intended, that wasn't predicted, and so we're giving you a heads up. And but importantly, to acknowledge even then that if the idea is to curtail a person's anxiety, that's not what's happening. You're basically it's really just about going, listen, we've changed the dynamics of what is about to be involved here, and we're giving you an out for that. Huge, that's just respectful, I think. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. So again, the context matters
Mhm.
for how we're encountering this. Okay, yeah, that's fair. All right, last question. And then we're gonna have to wrap up, but we have several more questions. So stick around for the hangout. If we didn't get to your question, it's not because we skipped it on purpose, it's because we have a lot of questions. So stay here, we'll keep talking. But last question, and I think this is a great question, and I didn't even pay anyone to ask this. Hey David, do you have any book recommendations, particularly pertaining to this idea that we're in our bodies? And someone said, as someone who's pretty much perpetually in his head, I love this idea of remembering I'm in my body. So this is your opportunity to give us some book recommendations.
So, honestly, one that I just finished up this last weekend is The Extinction of Experience: Being Human in a Disembodied World by Christine Rosen. And there are a few pieces in it that, to be fairly honest, I don't agree with. The author kind of blindly accepts some certain things that have been debunked for reasons I have no idea why. But regardless, 95% of it is fantastic and some really, really good reflections to engage with about just the nature of human experience and what we've done by offloading our experience onto that. Sweet, yeah, $2 on Audible. Awesome sauce. And then, of course, The Experience Machine by Andy Clark that I mentioned earlier. Lisa Feldman Barrett, both of her books. And then there's a couple of others, of course, but I haven't fully read them, so I always get a little wary of recommending sometimes.
That's fair. Sometimes I have things on my to read list that I haven't read yet. And you don't know until you get to, like, chapter 4 buried in the middle of it. And you're like, oh no, there's Nazis. So yeah, totally get it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not even gonna name names, but there was a book that ended up on a reading list at my job one time where we got halfway through it and then eugenics came up out of
Oh
nowhere.
my gosh.
It was very upsetting. So
Yeah.
read the whole book before you recommend it to anybody. That's the takeaway from that. Although it was suspect from the start in my book, but anyway. Okay, we've got The Extinction Experience, The Experience
Yep.
Machine, and the one you mentioned earlier. Wait, How Emotions Are Made by Lisa
Mhm.
Feldman Barrett. Yes.
Yep. And then 7.5 Lessons of the Brain, also by her.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put those in. Excellent. We knew we weren't getting out of here without any book recommendations. Come on, we knew
Yeah.
that. All right. Well, I
And
appreciate
12 Rules for Life.
yes. You
There are
tried, but
so many better books out there that'll give you the good qualities out of that without the rest of
stop
it.
it, Helen.
I'm sorry. I can't help myself. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Oh man,
I
So
would
that's funny.
try to
one of
make
his
a
rules
joke
is to just to
about
say
one
one
of
of
the
his rules
12
is to pet a
rules.
cat. I do agree to pet a cat. Go
Pet a
pet
I
a
cat,
mean,
cat.
touch grass,
yeah, touch grass.
touch grass. Okay, let's wrap up. We got to go to the hangout and answer the rest of these questions. David, before we go to the hangout, do you have any final remarks for us? And I mean like real short, one sentence.
Watch Arcane.
Watch Arcane. That is the
Watch
takeaway.
Arcane.
Oh,
And I-
and we have the poll results. Let me pull those up. Thank you for mentioning that. We will share those and then we're going to wrap up. So real quickly, the questions we asked were, do you think you can control your emotions? 9% of people said yes. 14% said no. A whopping 73% answered define control, which I think
I
was
love
an
it.
excellent choice. And
Mhm.
5% said not even close. They're just there. Okay. Next one was, what do emotions reveal about a person? And this was the one where people could pick more than one choice. So it may add
Mhm.
up to more than 100%, FYI. In case you're thinking the math's not mathing. Yes, it is. It's multiple choice, which means make multiple choices. So 25% of people selected that emotions reveal their deepest truths. 5% selected, it reveals whether they're an empath. 30% selected, it reveals what is deemed important. And 75% selected that emotions reveal your physiological state. And then question 3, what do you do to help regulate your emotional states? 21% of people said eating and drinking. The majority, or the plurality, the most people selected play and creativity with 47%. I'm forgetting
That's
my
awesome.
statistics words here. 16% said socializing, and 16% are a Zen master or perhaps a Vulcan, to
Okay.
Rob's point. And then finally, what show is guaranteed to make you cry? Well, I've got bad news for you, David. 95% of people think that question is Arcane. And one person selected seriously. How amazing is Arcane? And since that was phrased as a question, we're not sure if they were agreeing with you or not. So there you have it, folks. I think it's time to move on to wrapping up here, and we're going to go to the Hangout, and we may talk more about Arcane, and we'll also get to the rest of your questions. But thanks for coming. Don't forget to join us next week. We have a whole lot of fun topics coming up. Next week, we have Dr. Daryl Ray with his infamous duck sex talk. That's not what it's called, but we all know it is the duck sex talk. It's called Sexy Evolution, what the Pope does not know about human sexuality. So be sure and join us next week for that. We also have our Festivus holiday episode upcoming. We'll take a break over the holiday weekend, and then we're going to be back again with some guests such as David Fitzgerald, John Gleason, Forrest Falkai, and Stephen Novella. So stick around for that, and don't forget to follow us online. We are all over the social medias. Only go on there if it is good for your mental health and well-being. Feel free to instead touch grass or whatever else people do. But we are on Facebook. We have a main page, a support group page. We're on Instagram and TikTok, and of course we are on YouTube. So check us out on there, as well as Blue Sky. That's right. We are also on Blue Sky. So you can find us there too. Just search Recovering from Religion and you'll find us. And if you are so inclined, feel free to like, subscribe, share, all of that, and help other people find us and our services. And Rob, what else can people do to get involved?
I just joined Blue Sky this week too, by the way. So to get involved, yes, consider volunteering for Recovering from Religion. We have learned here that healing can also come from helping other people heal. Volunteers here find meaning and purpose by doing the work with us. All of our services are supported by our staff of volunteers, and we're always in need of more people. There's all sorts of jobs besides the forward-facing ones like the helpline. You are needed to help find and vet and post good resources for our clients and our agents to use to help the clients. We need people to host the support groups we talked about earlier. We need people to moderate the online Slack community. We even need people to punch up our IT offerings so that the agents can be more effective when they're dealing with clients. And even what we're doing here right now, like people can volunteer to work on RfRx, either in the forward-facing realm like we're doing here right now at this moment, or people behind the scenes need to edit this and put it up on YouTube and our audio podcast. And we're falling behind in that, so I'm sure we need people. To apply to volunteer, fill out the form on our main page. There's a little volunteer thing at the upper right section. And that's at recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer if you want to go there directly. Also, we have a recently created short, just 3-minute video on our main page, which is named RFR What We Do. It's near the bottom, and I suggest you can send that to anyone else in your circle of friends or family who you think needs our support, because it's a really quick description of all the things that we do to provide to people. Back to you, Cara.
Thank you. And with that, let me pass it over to Dr. Ray to wrap us up for the evening and help us begin to anticipate next week's talk.
Well, thank you, Kara, I am excited about getting to do this talk next week. I haven't given it in quite a while. Yeah, anyway, a long time ago, I guess is the last time I gave it. But the information has not really changed a lot. The echidna, you'll have to find out how many penises does a echidna have. That'll just kind of tease you, you know, for the future. David, you always come with more information than my little brain can accumulate. I'm gonna have to rewatch this damn thing to input a little bit more information, I guess. But thanks for bringing such a comprehensive understanding of what's going on in our heads or not. I really like that list that you put up, those 4 pieces. Those are really cool. And you know, that leads me to think that every one of our volunteers should watch this talk, and probably Rob's talk as well that we mentioned earlier, because what we really are doing is asking our agents to be neuropsychologically humble. Be humble, because we don't have the answers any more than the client at the other end of the phone has, or the other end of the chat. And I've seen our best, most effective chats come from times when our agents show real humility and willingness to just listen. That's just so important to our clients. Anyway, I'm sitting here trying to translate that, David, as you're talking, and thinking, damn, that's really a point I think our agents could benefit from. If you enjoyed this, we hope you'll come back next week. I'll be talking about the people call it the duck sex talk. That's not what it's only one slide in the whole thing. But you will learn a lot about sex. I'll just guarantee you.
But that, Daryl, that slide is one of the most fascinating slides in the whole thing.
It is. I agree. And if you want to support us, please donate. And we're looking forward to you joining us at the Festivus Festival, and all the stuff that we can do and want to do to support you during the holiday season, if that is something you need. That's what we're here for. We're here to be that support that you don't get from your family, perhaps, or your former communities if you came from a high control religious environment.